This is the Fixer Punk Podcast, the podcast that knows summer cutting season is far overdue, but is subconsciously interpreting the cloudy weather in June to mean it's still bulking season. I'm Grayson Peltier. Now today I want to talk about a topic that I think is going to have a lot of importance for progressive activists, any sort of activist, and anybody that feels like they are facing a very large amount of resistance, whether it's like specific to you or systemically toward being able to succeed or even being able to like live your life in general. You feel like things are just not quite going your way and like you don't have the potential to overcome them and you don't quite know why. I've discovered through a bit of observation that a lot of times people will face opposition that is way out of line with what they expect and will regress quite a bit from that. But what you have to do is you actually have to realize and reframe the situation and see that it is actually an indication of an interesting typology and a sign that things may actually wind up going your way in a much bigger and better way than you ever expected. And what will oftentimes happen is this is the easiest way to describe this is when you see a social movement going on of people who are somehow oppressed, people who are people of color, lower socioeconomic status especially is a big one, LGBTQ, disabled. And conservatives will go and they will call them weak, lazy whiners. And they will also call them the biggest, largest, hardest threat to society ever in the history of all time. And this is a weird paradox. And sometimes this stuff actually gets internalized, actually gets into your head of then viewing yourself in a negative way and viewing your chances in a very negative way because they call you a weak, lazy whiner. And that sometimes gets internalized at some point. And in a way, that's what they want you to do. That's where they want you to be. And it's a very difficult thing because it can really hurt your mindset and your ability to advocate for change and take you from either being strong in wanting to advocate for social change to either just completely regressing and becoming weak and unable to achieve change and to stop advocating, or it'll turn you into basically just one of them, people who are part of the dominant ideologies because you can have your ability to have strength is legitimized more within the dominant ideology. But there are some signs, some telltale signs that this might be going on, and there are ways to overcome it that are pretty unique. And this is especially true if people view you as like troubled or they see you as being basically just like a problem. And sometimes it can even make you really depressed or anxious or things like that. But it's really just because you are not living up to your potential, and the way society and systems are designed and the way people are talking to you is to get you to tap out of living through that potential, when in fact you are a much stronger fighter than you believe, and they know it. They know how strong, how good you are, and the chance that you have for victory, so they're trying to kick you when you're down so that you don't rise up against them and their power. And part of the way they kick you when you're down is to get you to believe that you are a lot weaker because of your social or societal vulnerabilities. Because you don't have those markers of social status, then you're not entitled to the right to be such a strong person and to achieve victory. And they'll even design systems to make it so that your day-to-day life, you have to kind of pull back from your individuality and what makes you great in order to be seen as a good person, even though you are acting morally, ethically, and responsibly. None of this is an excuse to not act in a moral, ethical, responsible way. But there's a lot of stuff in society that's just about control. And when people go against that system of control, they can wind up getting resistance in these very weird ways. Not just like if you're conventionally strong, the way you're going to experience resistance is going to be just straight up resistance. But when you're non-conventionally strong, it may come in this very weird form. And some of the signs that you're feeling this and that this is getting inside of you emotionally is basically the idea that you're kind of being seen as less of like a threat. Like they don't see you as like an opponent, especially if you're advocating for a policy idea. They don't see you as like a worthy political opponent or a worthy opponent in terms of your workplace bargaining negotiations, your union negotiations, whatever advocating you're doing for social change. They see you more as a nuisance. And I've said this before on a few episodes, and this is kind of going to explain the nuts and bolts behind this statement, which is today's nuisance is tomorrow's champion. But right now, you don't see that. You're at a point where you're being beaten up on. You just want to live your life, but you kind of can't. So you have to engage. Things are so hard for you, you have to engage in advocacy to try to change things. But then when you do that, you can't fit in. If you try to go things the way that they would tell you to do normally, you just can't fit in. You try to go through the normal systems of economic achievement, social achievement, all those things, you just can't fit in. Nothing goes your way and everything just feels harder for you and you can't point out why. You're doing the right thing, you're still ridiculed. You just can't do things the way others can do them, but you can do a lot more than them is the strange part. Is your potential is way more than the things that you are somehow failing at right now. And you know that deep down. But you just can't make it in those conventional spaces. And you're trying to change things in society. And what you're met with is this bizarre form of both ridicule and resistance at the same time. And you feel like it's disproportionate. You're frequently a failure, but it's not because you're bad. It's just because you disagree or you can't really stand the way they are. So you're in business, you're in the workplace or whatever, and you're not advancing, you're not getting promoted because you have great ideas, you have good things you can do, but the current structures of the systems in that workplace or in the economy are just not supporting it, not supporting the way you view things, even though in the end, you can very well come out on top. Of course, people that are your competition, especially in business, don't want you to come out on top. They don't want you to, or your opposition politically, they don't want you to come out on top. So they want to find some unique ways to stop you from doing that. And they know that sometimes because you're more emotionally vulnerable, you're not purely ruthless. They know that they can use that a little bit and stick themselves inside of you and say, oh yes, this is your space. Your space is to be held down and sort of stay on the bottom. And by making every little thing hard, they can do that. And you may be very strong, but you may wind up being viewed as extremely sensitive. Because of the opposition you're facing, of course, it's going to get to you a little bit mentally. There may be certain things that get to you more than other people, and you may be viewed as being really, really sensitive. When in fact, you're actually really strong, you have great ideas. And little stuff may just seem harder. Sometimes these kinds of things come with neurodivergence when you feel like things are a lot harder than they should be. But it's not really the same. It can come on its own. This more has to do with having sort of like an anti-authoritarian attitude. And for seemingly no reason, you're kind of knocked out of whatever you're doing for a very long time. For extended periods of time, you're sitting around sort of defeated and helpless and really more confused than anything. You're like, okay, I made one step forward, and every time I make one step forward, I go 10 steps back because I'm facing really fierce opposition. This is something that should be really basic. Like the idea I'm fighting for is something that should be a fundamental human right. I only want to get the kind of recognition in the workplace that I should be entitled to, the kind of treatment in the workplace that I should be entitled to. I only want to be treated fairly the way that other people are. But somehow I am being stopped. And that may make you to feel hopeless. And And especially when you're facing all this opposition. Maybe you've gone through, you've tried to improve your mental health and really you haven't made it, but it's because you just haven't seen that success. The success isn't coming, so you still feel bad about it. But still you have a small voice that tells you that you're a lot better than you're being told, and maybe you've shown strong potential and achievement in the past, but just not now. And more than anything, it feels like you're being kicked when you're down. And this should be a sign to you. It should be a sign that when you're facing this kind of opposition, that it's because the other side doesn't actually see you. They may say that you're weak, lazy, all of these things, but it's because they do see you as a threat. It's because whatever you're advocating for, whether that be a higher minimum wage, whether that be better treatment in the workplace, more rights for people of color, minorities, criminal justice reform, even if it's just for yourself to get a promotion or better pay at work, or the ability to make changes in your workplace conditions, or an idea you have in business that maybe threatens the status quo, it's because the reason why this is happening to you, the reason why the resistance is a lot harder and a lot harsher on you, the reason why you're being fought back on so hard is because you actually have potential and because your idea has some possible merit to it. And this can happen to anyone who has the ability to validate or spread ideas the establishment does not like. They want to knock you out before you can ever win. It's like the interference before a wrestling match. Like the other side will mob you before you can even get in the ring and have the bell ring. That kind of thing. And obviously it's not fun. Just like being physically beaten up is not fun. But having that come ahead of time is just, it's also not fun. And really the way that I explain this repressed warriors paradox very simply is the better of a fighter you are, the more likely you are to get badly beaten up. And it has less to do with physical fights than it does with potential and oppression. Because when you have potential, when your ideas, when you as a person have potential, you're going to be up for longer fights, more pain, and less of like a quick submission. Because if you were really weak, then you'd be out of it. You wouldn't be continuing to advocate. Your ideas wouldn't continue to be moving forward. You wouldn't continue to move forward with the possibility of having your business grow or your influence in your workplace grow or whatever you're advocating for. You wouldn't continue to have that possibility of having that influence if you didn't actually have the chance. And being stronger can sometimes mean that things hurt more. Because again, you are having to challenge yourself in order to get to that level. And it'll even be little things. Sometimes people avoid you. Will get kind of lonely because maybe what you're looking for isn't so popular. You're having some issues. And then maybe people don't want to be around you. Obviously you want to be, if you want to be in good favor with as many people as possible. Don't use anything I say as just an excuse to go out and be mean to people, be rude, do bad things, certainly nothing unethical. But sometimes when you're challenging, when you're making a statement that's more challenging, sometimes people will not want to be around you. Especially in today's highly politically polarized world, even doing little things like saying that we should fully recognize voting rights for people can lose you friends in this day and age, which is pretty unfortunate. Those types of little things can get people in your friend circle to go away, and it can be hard. And really, what I'm doing here is I'm sort of describing this typology to see if you relate to it. But I have to also, and I may make this multiple episodes, discuss this typology, but then discuss like your individual steps for how to deal with this new form of stress, this form of stress of being in a battle that maybe you didn't even know you were in. You're just out there trying to live your life, trying to get what you need in life. And you're realizing that there's this big battle over that. and that you're getting blindsided by it, and what are some ways that you can kind of help cope with it. But then, of course, there's also a systemic end of it, that we tend to create systems that marginalize people, that create a level of isolation that make it hard for people to come back from failure. And that really holds society back. And the good news, there's a little bit of positives to this, because if you're one of those people who you're fighting for equality, you're fighting to be treated right, and the response to it is not necessarily just a strong opposition, but it's a combination of both ridicule and strong opposition, maybe the fact that you're just being ridiculed can be a bit of an advantage, and people see you as being weak and see you as not being serious. Sometimes it can be a little bit of an advantage. Being low key can make things a little better sometimes. Like the example that I like to bring is a pro wrestler named Orange Cassidy. He's the AEW International Champion. He's has one of the best winning records of any wrestling champion right now, especially in AEW. But the guy started out basically by going into the ring and having his hands in his pockets, rolling in there. He doesn't even carry his title belt with him. He carries it in a backpack. He gives little miniature kicks, miniature slaps on people, and they see him, oh yeah, this guy's like a joke. I don't have to worry about him. But then suddenly out of nowhere, he comes out, he has this second wind to him, and he's just going really, really hard and actually fighting incredibly hard, having now many, many very super intense matches, and he's getting the wins. He's retained his championship for 5-6 months now? Or more. I have lost count. Sorry about that. But because people underestimated him, that can be a good thing. Now, sometimes if you're considered to be a repressed population, they can publicly say, oh yeah, you're a little nothing, you're just a little prick or whatever. And then they're fighting you back really, really hard, and they are using every single way to try to defeat you, and you're not getting it. And that confusion is kind of a way to get you off balance. It's a way to get you to think, oh yeah, you know what? I'm going to go in there and this is not going to be so hard because they're underestimating me. But you have to be ready to, just like Orange Cassidy is, he's going to come in with hands in his pockets, all that, but you have to be ready to fully fight with everything that's in you. And some people just don't get that because they internalize the narrative that they are weak and lazy, just like they're being told by the world around them. But make no mistake, even and especially if you're being ridiculed for your ideas, or you're being seen as being weak, or being seen as being just a nuisance rather than a proper opponent, maybe the way people see you is not like the conventional form of strength. And they give people who have a conventional form of strength and a conventional form of intelligence, a conventional form of wit, a lot more grace. They'll give somebody like an Andrew Tate or an Elon Musk more grace than somebody who is advocating for the rights of the LGBTQ community, or who's advocating for higher minimum wage, who's advocating for economic rights. They're going to give them a little more slack. But you have to understand that you may be in a situation where every mistake is magnified because they see you both as a threat and as an object of ridicule. Every mistake you make can be magnified, and you have to be careful for that. And you have to kind of stay trained at all times. Things are going to be a little bit more like an Iron Man match for you. Things are going to go longer and take more time. And you can wind up, and the thing is that you may wind up just going about your life and you're like, oh man, I'm getting crushed out of nowhere. I'm just here asking for what I need, and out of nowhere, I feel like I'm being pommeled to the ground, and I'm sad. But the important part is that you have to get up. The reason why you're being fought back so hard on what it is that you're looking for is because you have potential. And sometimes, and a lot of times, you have to then embrace, you have to become a fighter somewhat involuntarily. And and sometimes you're being tempted with like the option of like, okay, you can just give up on your uniqueness, whatever it is that you're fighting for, give up on the union demands or whatever, give up on the policy changes that you want, and then just submit. And sometimes they'll say, especially for marginalized communities of color, whatever, if you just conform to every single thing that capitalism wants out of you, then you'll be fine. That's kind of the devil's bargain they give you, but you can't fall into that. You have to know that what you're doing is in fact good, just, moral, and right. And if it is that, then you continue. If it's not that, then obviously reevaluate. But anything less than full submission will then be seen as like some sort of rebellion that they'll fight back against. And it can be hard because it can be confusing. Sometimes society gives you signs that are a little bit unclear and you can't make it out, especially if you're talking from neurodivergence. You just don't know what's expected of you sometimes. But this process of sort of getting beaten up and ridiculed before you can even get up can create a bit of a death spiral. It can create like this whole thing of basically just thinking, I'm down, I'm weak, and I'm just going to stay down because every time I try to get up, even every time I try to get up just a little bit, I am being hit so freaking hard. Again, you should see that as you can see that as a positive sign. If what you're doing is positive, then that can be a positive sign. And you have to kind of kick out of that death spiral. And you have to know that even though you're in like a marginalized situation, you're not in a situation where somebody would necessarily call you a peak performer or somebody that has like high performance needs. Like we think of like mental high performance and stuff like that for athletes, for successful business people and entrepreneurs. But we don't really think of that as something we think of that for like musicians even. So they're like physical performance and mental performance things for like artists, things like that. But for people that are engaged in advocacy, people that are coming from like a much more lowly place, people that are coming from a place where they're seen as being repressed or downtrodden in society, but somehow also a threat because their ideas and their uniqueness is sort of a threat. They're not necessarily seen, or they wouldn't even think of like themselves as somebody who needs like a high performance mindset, physical training, and all of that. But you do. There isn't really a movement that I've seen, especially in like the activism community. There's been some movement toward like self-care and basic stuff like that, but not really toward high performance. But you have to realize that you are a high performer. You are a fighter. You need to be physically and mentally trained. And they do want you to, especially if you're coming from some sort of oppressed category. The goal of this combination technique that they're using to put you off balance, of saying that you're both a weak little piece of crap and also acting like you're the biggest threat of all time, is to get you to surrender to controlling and inadequate systems of so-called care. They think, they're like, you need to go into the really crappy low-wage job. So they see somebody out there who's trying to do something different, that's trying to start their own business, that's trying to start like a cooperative environment. They're going to start a business that's going to pay people well. They're going to run for office. They're going to do something great. What things in society are set up to do is not to allow you to pursue that greatness. They want you to see, my economic situation is so bad. My life is going so poorly that I have to just sit back and I have to take this lowly place. And they're going to make it seem like, oh yes, the way you're going to be cared for, the only way you're going to be cared for is with a job. If you're on welfare, get a job, any job. The old mantra of the Riverside welfare reform doctrine that pervades the current state of welfare. There's actually a really good podcast series on this called The Uncertain Hour from NPR, if you want to go listen to that. But they want you to surrender. They want you to tap out to those systems because they're like, we can't have people of diverse backgrounds. We're getting a little better about this as a society, but we can't necessarily have people, especially people with low socioeconomic status, being in leadership. They want you to just stay in low wage jobs. So even if you're somebody, let's say you have a degree, they had one of these stories on the Uncertain Hour. You have a degree in a professional field. You have experience in a professional field, but you're out of work and you wind up in welfare. The welfare office is going to try to put you into some sort of job stacking boxes at a warehouse, put you into some sort of cleaning job, when you have qualifications to do so much more. That, again, you're internalizing the ridicule. You're like, oh my God, I'm just this lowly, low-wage worker. When no, you can do a heck of a lot more in life. They just want you to be in those situations and stay down there so that you don't think of that, so that you never get to their level and you're not a threat to them if you just stay in that level. Meanwhile, they make you feel like, oh yes, this is care. This is making me better. Or sometimes even in terms of mental health, sometimes you'll be told that you can't do things. You can't reach a certain level. You'll never be able to tolerate that level of stress. You'll never be able to be that, you won't be able to be that athletic. You won't be able to perform that well mentally. When in fact, if you got treatment maybe from another doctor, another type of mental health provider who works with people who are more successful, who are more wealthy, they're like, oh yeah, you know what? You have autism, but we know that we can get you to perform well in your specific area of special interest. You have ADHD, and yeah, that could be an advantage to you in certain things. Instead of just, okay, settle down, take this low wage job, take high doses of sedating medications, not getting the latest and best help. So there is sort of a repressive form of help that is more tantamount to tapping out than it is to continuing the fight. And you have to kind of keep your eye out for that and be ready to advocate for yourself, even when you're being told that you're going to get the help you need. Which, of course, get to the right people. The key thing is to get to the right people and get the right kind of help. And just know that maintaining strength generally promotes survival in all things. That kind of being strong like that, in whatever it is, as long as you don't do it stupidly, there can be a bit of a competitive advantage to staying a little low key, to slacking off, to not being like all on there, not being like a huge threat to people. Of course, diplomacy, being nice to people, being kind, that is part of who you are. In a way, they might want to actually they might want to make you out to be some sort of uncaring, unfeeling savage too. They might want to make the people who hold your position out to be people who just only care about themselves. So don't fall into that trap either. And I'm getting into a bit of more the solution side of things for our repressed warrior out there, but I think I want to do a separate episode just talking about kind of the steps in your own everyday life to take and in your activism and in your movement work. If you feel like you are a repressed warrior, someone that's always being ridiculed, you feel like you're always being kicked when you're down, you're always just down and you can't seem to get up, even when you're just making the slightest moves and you feel like it may be better just for you to stay down there and just tap out and just accept a worse fate. But you just really don't want to do that. You know that there's something in you that can achieve a lot more. You know that there's change that can be made in society that you just have not yet achieved. For that kind of person, I have some specific steps that I'm going to discuss. But the first one is to embrace it. And this is where I'm going to leave you right now, because these episodes are getting a little long and I don't want to make them too long. The first step is just to embrace the fact that you are actually really strong, that you are a good fighter. And the reason why people will sometimes view you as being less than or they'll try to fight back against you really, really hard in a way that you didn't expect, is because you are that good. You are just that good. Know that's who you are. And that could help you to not become so negative. And you want to stop yourself from fighting yourself. Of like, you're seeing this out there. You're like, oh my God, this is such a huge obstacle for me to overcome. They're putting up all these obstacles for me, but not for the other guy. And you want to just stop fighting yourself. The outside world is already oppressive enough for you not to just want to oppress yourself. So as you start to view yourself and conceptualize yourself as stronger, then you're going to start to behave differently. You're going to start to behave in a way that you are leading with your strength and not with weakness or whimpering or anything like that. Of course, a good emotional vulnerability comes with it. The other thing that I want to leave you with is to ask yourself whether or not you may be doing something a little bit wrong. You want to ensure that you are acting with care, because now that you know that you're strong, you can act with a lot. You have power. And as soon as you realize that you have power, you need to know that there's responsibility that comes with power, and know how to wield that power appropriately and in a responsible, ethical way, and learn to sort of have that care and that discipline to use power in the right way, because you don't want to become like your opponents. You don't want to become like the people who are oppressing you. You don't want to become like the oppressive capitalist hellscape that we live in. You don't want to be contributing to the problem of it. So now that you know that, like, simplest way to put that is, if you know that you can throw a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, you better know how to control a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, because it can hurt somebody a lot more than a 60-mile-an-hour fastball if you throw it into the wrong place. So realize your strength and then know how to use that strength in a proper and controlled way. And there are some personal steps, because again, you have to realize that even though you are coming from an oppressed or marginalized situation where you wouldn't necessarily think of yourself as being a high performer, in order to achieve in advocacy or in business, in social entrepreneurship, you do need to nurture yourself and train yourself up with that kind of fighting strength and those disciplines in your life. But they're gonna work in a different way. They may not be exactly the way that the wealthy CEO is keeping their body and their mind in good condition. It may be a different way that you keep your body and mind in the right level of conditioning for yourself. And I'm going to discuss some of those strategies on the next episode, so I hope you will join me for that. Of course, anytime I talk about anything related to mental health, I do want to give the disclaimer that if you believe you have any sort of medical or mental health concern, please consult a qualified physician for a comprehensive evaluation promptly. But I do hope you join me again for the next episode. Please follow the social media on TikTok. That is at FixerPunk, FIXERPUNK, as well as on Instagram, on Twitter at GraysonNation, GREYSONNATION. If you feel like you're in this situation, you feel like you're a bit of a repressed warrior dealing with that paradoxical feeling sad and down with yourself, but also knowing that you have a lot of potential to create a lot of change, you have a personal story, or you're dealing with some sort of oppression and you want to talk about it, you want me to maybe analyze it, break it down, think about the systems around you, give me a call. Call in, leave a message, 844-477-PUNK, 844-477-7865. Leave a message anytime, day or night, 844-477-7865. If you have an advocacy organization that you run or are a part of, if you're campaigning, if you are a socially responsible business, or anybody with a groundbreaking idea or that needs help learning how to market, advocate, communicate, develop good strategies, any consulting or advice around the business of changing the world, then Offspeed Solutions may be able to help you with marketing, communications, digital marketing, advocacy strategy, as well as various business support services so that you can operate authentically and strongly in your message, your values, your ideas, and make things work well and get that extra help and that outside set of eyes to know if your messaging is landing in the right way and if you're communicating with your key audiences in the way that they will best receive and best perceive you so that you can come out on top. So if you're leading a campaign, nonprofit organization, advocacy organization, or group in any way, and you need help getting your message out there in the best possible way, go to offspeedsolutions.com, OFFSPEED solutions.com, and I would be happy to work with you. I'd love to discuss, and I'd love to try to help you get the best results in your advocacy or business success journey. Thank you so much for taking your time with me today, and I really appreciate having you here.